Gopijana Balabha Girivara Radhe Gopijana Balabha Jasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Brajajana Jasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Brajajana Jamunatira Vana Jadi Vanacha Jamunatira Vana Jadi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hadi 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 Gopi Jana Balabha Girivara Dadi 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 Jasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Jasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Brajajana Jamunatira Vana Jadi Jamunatira Vana Jadi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hadi 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 Jayom Vishnu Pad Paramahansa Parivijagacharya Astatarasata Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Gaur Premanandi. Seeing this picture at the beginning of every class is going to be an inspiration. The mood of Uddhava, the compassion of Krishna, his loving glance, preparing Uddhava for some upcoming service not so dissimilar from service that we're called upon to do. We don't have the qualification of Uddhava, but similar service, carry the message of Krishna to the world. In his case specifically, carry the message of Krishna to the followers of Narayan Rishi. And following that service, Krishna he's already indicated he'll take him back to Godhead. We heard in the prayers from Lord Brahma after he finished his prayers, a very nice expression, teaching, that if circumstances that one forgets Krishna at the time of death, the bhakti that that soul carries will carry the soul to Krishna. And Krishna will, having accepted the devotion, not just stuff, not just doing things, but the devotion to Krishna, that bhakti will transport one to the spiritual world. So that's where Uddhava's headed, although we also hear of his taking birth as a blade of grass in Vrindavan. So that's also back to Godhead. In the mood, at least in the mood of receiving the mercy of the residents of Vrindavan. And then when the queens came to Uddhava Kund, hearing that Uddhava had prayed to take birth as a blade of grass, they had big kirtan. Uddhava appeared, and according to Padma Purana, the Bhagavad Mahatmya section, he gave a month-long Bhagavad Gita class, a Bhagavatam class, teachings of Krishna's activities, etc., to the queens, and they, one by one, returned to the spiritual realm. So who knows what the adventure is ahead of us, but we do know one thing, like Uddhava, take shelter of the lotus feet of Krishna. But yesterday, we discussed text 7, and I want to do a little review because there's some nice little images created by Shruti Mangara. Nice graphics on the left. You notice on the upper left corner, there's a witch flying in the sky. Just below her is death, and a lake of death over to the right, and someone also waiting for someone for the point of death, and in between is trying to become enjoyers, finding misery. Who knows who that old lady is with the 7 candles in front of her? Worship of some kind. To see anything separate from Krishna is illusion. They're over on the right-hand side. Interesting illustration. To see anything separate from Krishna is illusion. And attraction to any kind of material illusion, either good or bad, is ultimately useless, since it obliges the living entity to continue wandering in the cycle of birth and death. So, attachment to the temporary is unwanted. The message of detachment was very strongly presented. A few more of these. The real truth is not material, nor is it temporary. The real truth is called Atma, or the eternal soul. And among all eternal souls is one supreme. We see many souls or bodies down at the bottom there, and super soul in between, within the heart. He is called the personality of Godhead, and in his original form he is known as Krishna. The knowledge gathering process culminates in perception of the inconceivable transcendental form of Krishna. From this verse 7, and we'll go back here because that's the next verse 8. So now I'm going to read fast because there's a lot of material for text 8. Here's the BBT translation for text 8. One whose consciousness is bewildered by illusion perceives many differences in value and meaning among material objects. Thus, one engages constantly on the platform of material good and evil and is bound by such conceptions. Absorbed in material duality, such a person contemplates the performance of compulsory duties, non-performance of such duties, and performance of forbidden activities. Karma, vikarma, and akarma. Here's Bhaktisiddhanta's gloss, or little summary, of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary, an elaboration of the topics described in the previous verse is being given here. The living entities sometimes fall into the trap of duality. They think, this is prescribed, therefore it's better. This is faulty, therefore inferior. This is the conception of ignorant people. For the fallen souls, what is superior and what is inferior? King Chitraketu has said, so we're going to hear in Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary this 6th canto quote. So, King Chitraketu has said that all objects in this material world are insignificant, therefore it is difficult to ascertain which one is a curse, which one is a favor, which one is heaven, which one is hell, which one is happiness, which one is distress. The faults and qualities of objects are attributed to them by the Vedas when it says that prescriptions are qualities and prohibitions are faults. This is a fact. Nivriti pravriti. The Vedas have described these subject matters for the benefit of the people who are in ignorance. Karma refers to those activities which are approved by the Vedas. Akarma means to not perform those activities, and Vikarma refers to those activities which are prohibited by the Vedas. Those who find faults in qualities are certainly ignorant. It's a little deep, right? What's going on here? Here's the BBT commentary. The illusory mental platform of existence is described in this verse. The word ayuktasya indicates the conditioned soul who does not fix his mind on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is clearly described in Bhagavad Gita and other Vedic literature that Lord Krishna, the Absolute Truth, is within everything, and everything is within the Lord. The example may be given that when a woman loves a man, she is most eager to see him, and she daily sees him dressed in different clothes. Actually, the woman is interested not in the clothes, but in the man. Similarly, within every material object, the Supreme Personality is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, one who has developed love of God is constantly seeing the Lord everywhere, and not just the superficial material objects that cover the Lord. Paragraph. Again, this word ayuktasya. The word ayuktasya in this verse indicates one who has not come to the stage of reality. Such a person, being deprived of loving devotional service to the Lord, attempts to enjoy innumerable forms and flavors of material experience. This temporary, illusory engagement is not the constitutional function of the bewildered living entity who remains without any awareness of the ultimate reality of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Within the world of matter, there are undoubtedly varieties. Among dogs, they're pedigree poodles and common mutts. And among horses, there are thoroughbreds and old gray mares. Similarly, some human beings are beautiful and educated, and others are dull and homely. Some are rich, and some are poor. In nature, we find fertile land and sterile land, lush forests and useless deserts, invaluable gems and colorless stones, flowing transparent rivers and stagnant dirty ponds. In human society, we find happiness and distress, love and hate, victory and defeat, war and peace, life and death, and so on. However, we do not have any permanent relationship with any of these conditions because we are eternal spirit souls, part and parcel of Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Vedic culture is arranged in such a way that everyone can become perfect in self-realization simply by performing his occupational duty for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Sve sve karmani abhirata samsiddhim labate nara. In case you don't recognize that, that's Bhagavad Gita 18:45, which translates, by following his qualities of work, every man can become perfect. Now, please hear from me how this can be done. Ready? Some conditioned souls, however, believe that complete perfection of life may be achieved by performing ordinary, non-spiritual duties on behalf of family, nation, humanity, and so on. Others are interested in neither service to God nor noble mundane activities, and there are others who actively pursue sinful life. Such sinful persons generally rise from bed late in the afternoon and stay awake all night, taking intoxicants and engaging in illicit sex. Such a dark, hellish existence is caused by attraction to tamagun, the mode of ignorance. Actions in the mode of ignorance are called vikarma, as mentioned in this verse. Unfortunately, neither the materially responsible person, nor the materially irresponsible person, nor the sinful person can achieve the real perfection of life Krishna consciousness. Although different societies and different individuals maintain different concepts of good and evil, all material things are ultimately useless in terms of our eternal self-interest, which is Krishna consciousness. This idea is expressed by the saintly king Chitraketu, 6th canto, 17th chapter, text 20. Quote, here's that reference, 6:17:20. This material world resembles the waves of a constantly flowing river. Therefore, what is a curse and what is a favor? What are the heavenly planets and what are the hellish planets? What is actually happiness and what is actually distress? Because the waves flow constantly, none of them has an eternal effect. Paragraph. This is really a long purport. The argument may be given that since in the Vedas there are prescribed and forbidden activities, the Vedas also accept the concept of good and evil within the material world. The fact is, however, that is not the Vedas themselves, but the conditioned souls who are bound up in material duality. The function of Vedic literature is to engage each individual at the particular level on which he is presently situated and gradually elevate him to the perfection of life. The material mode of goodness is not itself spiritual, but it does not impede spiritual life. Since the mode of goodness purifies one's consciousness and creates a hankering for higher knowledge, it is a favorable platform from which to pursue spiritual life, just as the airport is a favorable place for which to travel. If a man desires to travel from New York to London, the New York airport is certainly the most favorable place from which to travel. But if the man misses his plane, he is no closer to London than anyone in New York who did not go to the airport. Clever. That's Sri Dayananda Maharaj. In other words, the advantage of the airport is meaningful only if one catches his plane. Similarly, the material mode of goodness is the most favorable situation from which to move up to the spiritual platform. The Vedas prescribe and forbid various activities to lift the conditioned soul to the mode of goodness, and from that point he should rise to the spiritual platform by transcendental knowledge. Therefore, if one does not come to the platform of Krishna consciousness, his elevation to the material mode of goodness is useless, just as a trip to the airport is useless for one who misses his plane. In the Vedas, there are injunctions and prohibitions that appear to accept good and evil among material things, but the ultimate purpose of Vedic regulation is to create a favorable situation for spiritual life. If one can immediately take to spiritual life, then there's no need to waste time with rituals within the modes of nature. Therefore, Krishna advises Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita 2:45, Trigunya Vishaya Veda, Nishtrigunyo Bhavarjana, Nirdvandvo Nityasatvasto Niryoga Kshema Atmavan. Translation. The Vedas mainly deal with the subject of the three modes of material nature. Rise above these modes, O Arjuna. Be transcendental to all of them. Be free from all dualities and from all anxieties for gain and safety, and be established in the self. In this connection, Srila Madhvacharya has quoted the following verses. There's two of them. From Mahabharata. Quote, within the material world, the conditioned souls consider residence on the heavenly planets and celestial pleasures, such as the pious enjoyment of beautiful women, to be good and desirable things. Similarly, painful or miserable conditions are considered to be evil or bad. However, all such perception of good and bad in the material world is undoubtedly based upon the fundamental mistake of considering oneself and not the Supreme Personality of Godhead to be the ultimate doer or performer of all actions. Next verse. On the other hand, a person who knows that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the actual controller of material nature, and that is ultimately, it is ultimately He, Personality of Godhead, who is moving everything, can free himself from the bondage of material existence. Such a person goes to the abode of the Lord. Additional commentary is Bhakti Siddhanta's own commentary. This is much shorter. Mental speculators distance themselves from the consideration of the absolute truth and engage in enjoying various sense objects, being bereft of the service of the non-dual substance, the son of the king of Vraja. That is not the constitutional propensity of the spirit soul. That is the illusion of the unsuccessful yogis. Being controlled by the conception of faults and qualities, such people accept a few temporary activities as prescriptions and a few activities as prohibition. In this way, they attribute superiority and inferiority to various objects. But if all objects are seen in relation to Krishna, such distinctions will not arise. In order to attain liberation from such conceptions that are based on finding faults and attributing qualities, the topic of Brahma-Gayatri has been described. That's Srimad Bhagavatam, commentary on Brahma-Gayatri. Spiritual knowledge means knowledge with practical application. If one does not know the mystery of this, then he is sure to fall into illusion. Thus, he attributes faults and qualities to different persons and addresses them as Sat Karmi, Vik Karmi, and Kuk Karmi. Vishwanath's commentary was much shorter than that one. This verse explains the previous verse. There are various meanings endowed with good or bad qualities. An ignorant person, ayuktasya, perceives erroneously. For persons who have fallen into the current of the gunas, they do not know what is a good quality and what is a bad quality, or what is a good object or bad object. Chitraketu has said, this 6th canto verse. In the river of the gunas, what is a curse and what is a blessing? What is svarga and hell? What is happiness and sorrow? Doubt. Are not good and bad expressions in the Vedas? Expressed in the Vedas? Let's read it again. Are not good and bad expressed in the Vedas by injunctions and prohibitions? Reply, yes. But even the Vedas speak of the sense objects filled with ignorance. Karma is prescribed actions. Akarma is neglect of those actions. Vikarma is prohibited actions. These differences belong to a person who thinks in terms of good and bad, comma, a person in ignorance. And Jiva Goswami's commentary. An ignorant person perceives many illusory meanings with conceptions of good and bad. Thinking in terms of good and bad, the ignorant person sees differences in terms of the prescribed actions, neglected actions, and forbidden actions. Finally, a person with uncontrolled mind, ayuktasya, has illusions and consequently many anarthas. Thus, seeing in terms of good and bad, he sees differences in action. Now, the next verse, text number 9, is much shorter. Like, much shorter. I think I'm going to read it because the one following it for the next class tomorrow, it's again long. So here's text 9, 11.7.9. Therefore, bring all your senses under control, and thus subduing the mind, you should see the entire world as situated within the self, who is expanded everywhere, and you should also see this individual self within me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Interesting. Here's Bhaktisiddhanta's summary of Vishwanath's. Therefore, you should regulate your senses and understand that this material world, which is full of happiness and distress, is situated within the living entity as their object of enjoyment. You should also see this material world as well as the spirit soul as being under the full subordination of the super soul, which is one of my features. Now, that's really clear. I'll read it again because it's really simple and it's kind of a summation of, the buildup of detachment and attachment. Therefore, you should regulate your senses and understand that this material world, which is full of happiness and distress, is situated within the living entity as their object of enjoyment. You should also see this material world as well as the spirit soul as being under the full subordination of the super soul, which is one of my features. And much shorter, but still a little long-winded, is the BBT purport, and we're done. 2 paragraphs. The word vittatam, or widely expanded, implies that the individual jiva soul is present throughout the material universe, meaning not one soul but many souls spread throughout the universe. Similarly, in Bhagavad Gita 2.24, Lord Krishna says, Nityak Sarvagata. The individual soul is eternal and is expanded everywhere throughout the material and spiritual worlds. This does not mean, however, that each individual soul is all-pervading, but that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, has expanded by his marginal potency everywhere. Thus, one should not blindly conclude that a minute living entity is all-pervading. Rather, one should understand that God is great and expands his personal energy everywhere. In this verse, Atma Nik Sasva Vittatam, there's this word Vittatam again, widely expanded, that this material world is created to facilitate the sense gratification of the conditioned souls who are trying to enjoy without Krishna their actual master. The living entities are busily trying to exploit the external energy of the Lord, but their jurisdiction over the material world is illusory. Both the material nature and the conditioned living beings are energies of the Lord, and thus exist within the personality of Godhead and are under his supreme control. Last paragraph. The individual living entity exists for the pleasure of the personality Godhead and is the Lord's eternal servant. As soon as the senses become absorbed in material gratification, they lose their power to experience the absolute truth. The actual goal of sense activities is satisfaction of Vishnu, the Lord, and all of the senses can experience infinite spiritual pleasure by perceiving and serving the Lord in his personal feature. Those who adopt the impersonal conception of God, however, try to stop all sense activity, but because the senses cannot remain permanently inactive, they naturally turn to activities in the realm of material illusion. If one engages the senses in the service of the personality Godhead, then one enjoys unlimited pleasure upon seeing the transcendental beauty of the Lord's form. But unless one qualifies himself by pure loving devotion to Krishna, the Lord does not award him this exalted experience. Therefore, every conditioned soul should end his unnecessary separation from the personality of Godhead by rejoining the Lord's blissful company. The Lord personally comes down to reopen the blind eyes of the conditioned souls, and thus the Lord is personally teaching Uddhava so that sincere souls in the future might take advantage of instructions. Last sentence. Indeed, hundreds and millions of people even now derive spiritual enlightenment from Lord Krishna's instructions to Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita. Hundreds and millions. I asked Vaisheshika Prabhu, what's the number of Bhagavad Gitas distributed, in the history of ISKCON? And his answer was, it's hard to say because records weren't so well kept in the beginning days. There's certainly some idea of what was printed through Macmillan Press and this and that. So it's a plus or minus number. And I can't remember the number, but it's certainly millions. Does anybody remember? 133 million, something like that. Some big number. Lots of millions. Of course, probably lots of those millions are sitting on shelves and not being read, but there's certainly millions that are being read. And very actively not only distributing the books, but encouraging people to read the books by various methods, reading clubs and chapter a day and all kinds of things. For the very same purpose that Krishna is instructing Uddhava, and in course of time, people will begin, as we're doing, beginning to read Uddhava Gita, trying to understand and then apply what's being requested of us, what's being requested of Uddhava. It's the path back to Godhead, so if we want to know what that path is, Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam spread lots of light on that path, and then comes traversing the path with continual inspiration and guidance from the Bhagavatam itself, and ideally with devotees that are applying these principles in their lives and so forth. And our service is to follow and to assist others to give the opportunity to follow. Just a little sharing. Some time ago, somebody gifted me one of those little red playing devices of all of Prabhupada's recorded classes and morning walks and so forth. And I've been listening for several months now to Bhagavad Gita. And, I'm as far as chapter 16. And almost every verse, every time he's speaking, without fail, listen, by listening carefully to hear both the message and the tone of his voice, is such an appeal, of compassionate appeal, that people should not suffer. Why? What was motivating him to just to do what he did? It wasn't getting followers. It was instructions of his spiritual master, and taking the instruction to heart. There's the mood behind the instruction. And it's the mood is one of compassion. It's Lord Chaitanya's desire through disciplic succession down to his spiritual master, and he sacrificed left and right so that people wouldn't have to suffer. And then, the explanation is they can take it or not take it. That's the individual's choice. But he would try to remove obstacles like anything and give impetus to mitigate suffering. And, some of the language here sounds a little strident, especially for a modern enjoyer of the world. Like, this is really intense. On the other hand, it's for Uddhava, and it's giving that very clear portrayal of what to make the senses free from the hankering for sense enjoyment. It takes a clear sense of commitment. It doesn't mean throw away sense objects. It means have the right orientation towards them. Keeping life simple, not accumulating, over accumulating. This Rupa Goswami's Atyahara, and accepting what's required, and increasing dedication to service to Krishna, and the topics of Krishna, and the name of Krishna, and the form of Krishna, and the devotees of Krishna, and the abodes of Krishna. Lots of distraction, lots of attachment, lots of other things taking our attention here and there, and people that we're trying to assist taking their attention here and there, and the journey isn't easy, but it's a journey worth taking, and it leads to transcendence. There's things along the way dealing with the temporary, and it's the happiness and distress that come from dealing with the temporary, but not investing so much importance in either. Rather, investing importance in transcendence, in being in service to Krishna with the mind and senses. So that's our journey. And it's very practical. The instructions are being given here in very practical terms. I didn't find out the answer was Uddhava a householder or a brahmachari. But else, whichever is the case, the principle doesn't change. Most likely he was a householder. But the principle of attachment to the transcendence. He's already attached to Krishna. Look the picture. Look at he's grabbing hold of Krishna's feet and weeping. He knows Krishna's going to leave. Take me with you. He's attached to Krishna. He very deeply, not just emotionally, sentimentally, in other words, attached. Very profoundly spiritually attached. We know that. When he meets Uddhava, when he meets Vidura, and Vidura starts asking about Krishna and the Yadu dynasty members, although Vidura already knew, because he had already passed through Prabhas, he already knew, he just asked anyways. And Uddhava just went into a trance, just thinking about Krishna. And it was a struggle to come out of his trance in order to do some service for Uncle Vidura. So it's very clear, as the question has come up a few times, he's in this position of grief about Krishna's departure because of transcendental attachment. It's not due some mundane affinity or something like that. It's arising from his attachment from Krishna, and Krishna's causing this bewilderment by his internal potency, arranging for his bewilderment, for his elevation, relief from that bewilderment, and for our edification. But very valuable instruction. The graduate study of Bhagavad Gita's message. So let's see if there's some discussion.
Guru Maharaj, the first verse, the 8th verse was very high. It says that one, has distinguishes between good and bad in this material world. It's basically under illusion. Is my understanding correct that if I see the good and bad, thinking that this is good for my pleasure, this is bad because it will give me pain, is material illusion? Like, for example, if I want to, thinking of buying this phone and thinking that this will give me a lot of pleasure, lot of enjoyment, then that is material illusion. Whereas if I think that this will help me in the spiritual advancement in that way, this way, then it becomes
well, there's another dimension to this. Yes, to your question. However, the issue that's being touched on here is, what about, aside from the object of a mobile phone, what about sin and virtue? Prescribed duties, virtue, and performing prescribed duties. That's virtuous. That's good. And sinful activities, that's bad. And that's from the Vedas. It's not just how you see the cell phone. It's prescriptions. And so there's the worldly way of seeing good and bad, and there's the transcendental way of seeing what the Vedas say about good and bad. There's an additional dimension. That second one is what's being addressed here. What brings one is like this nice example, very good example. The airport is a good place to catch a flight, but if you miss your flight, then what's the use of going to the airport? You're no better off than the persons that didn't go to the airport. So there's the application of the good. Then there, from a spiritual or transcendental perspective, it has merit insofar as it helps one approach transcendence. So go the other way. It's not that, okay, since it's neither good nor bad, then I can continue with my sinful activities and it's just fine because it's meaningless anyways, and I'll just do my devotion and do my sinful activities. That's, thinking you're going to get to London without going to the airport. So it has its connection with transcendence. The Vedas are meant to elevate one. The purpose of the Vedas is to know Krishna. So there's merit in the good and demerit in the bad, insofar as assets to attain transcendence. but minus the transcendence feature, just seeing good and bad, that's illusion.
So, is my understanding correct that the Vedas prescribe,
Do's and don'ts.
this is do's and don'ts. So the performing the do's and not performing, avoiding the don'ts for to achieve the transcendence is the correct approach.
It helps one come to the stage of goodness. It's not the essence. Minus the essence, it's part of illusion. With the so what's the purpose of the following the do's and avoiding the don'ts? Flip it. Prabhupada's way of saying is, one becomes a devotee, they don't have attraction for the do-nots. They have attraction for the do's. When bhakti becomes activated, so how do you get bhakti activated? Well, it's association with bhakti. Supposing somebody's, an alcoholic. Supposing you're like a Bowery bum. Supposing somebody is, they're not going to be able to right away become clean. But if they they can run parallel, but the essence, go back the other way. This other discussion of Daivi Varnashram. I mean, it's 8:24. It's a big topic. So, what's the role of Daivi Varnashram in Krishna consciousness? Some people say it's for those who aren't devotees, and some people say even I'm a devotee, I'm not elevated to the human platform. We find devotees that know the philosophy, and they do some chanting and worship, and they're really outrageous. I know some people like that. So become human. So that's Canto 7, Chapter 11. Narada's instruction about how do you attain the state like Prahlad. You have to become first human, then you follow Daivi Varnashram, then you come to bhakti. So there's the gradual, but then there's the direct. And if one directly connects with the principle of pleasing Krishna, everything else will follow. Supposing one has a mix, which is generally the case, then one isn't going to have divine qualities right away. So what's important? Bhakti is important, and the other helps us. Going back to the verse and the message of this verse, the good and bad, we follow the good. We don't neglect the good, and continue to immerse ourselves in the bad. We follow, for example, regulative principles. We don't do those 4 regulative principles, violations. But that's just a beginning. It's not the essence of bhakti. It's to help us. You have more.
Quickly, Guru Maharaj. Even in bhakti, when we follow the regulative principles, can I say that if we don't understand the essence and perform it in that mood, it is still we are under illusion?
Yeah. But what's the distinction from illusion is illumination or enlightenment. We can be following the regulative principles, but not know Krishna, and not be living a life of devotion to Krishna. It's preliminary, but it's not the essence. Yes.
Thank you, Maharaj. Nice commentaries and nice discussion. I was just thinking about what you mentioned about bhakti taking us or elevating us to like Krishna or Goloka, even if at the time of death. if we don't remember Krishna, the bhakti we performed, will elevate us. And yesterday I was hearing to my spiritual master about a class on like Shyamananda Pandit, how he gets the Shyamasundar deity, and Radharani at the same time gives him like 12 benedictions along with it, saying whoever kind of like circumambulates even once Shyamasundar deity in the temple, they'll immediately go back to Godhead. Or one who does some seva or cleaning the temple of Shyamasundar, like this, she gives like 12 benedictions for whoever goes to Shyamasundar. So my evil mind or lazy mind is thinking, well, there's this path of bhakti where I will just follow this, or I can just go to Vrindavan, circumambulate Shyamasundar once, and then I'm done. Instead of going to the airport and missing my flight, there's a private jet which is promised by Radharani for me. I'm just going to take that shortcut and go. So I was just wondering how one should see that. It's a promise from Radharani, and how whether one should or is it like in addition to bhakti?
Few things. I'm unfamiliar with the 12 benedictions, so I can't comment on the 12 benedictions. But I can comment on other things that are found in scripture that say just do this and such and such. There are ways to see that, just do this and such and such. One way is within those things there's enormous potency. I mean, the one that stands out in my mind is those who see the Rath Yatra card of Lord Jagannath and stand and appreciate, they manifest forearms. Go back to Godhead, go to Vaikuntha. So I've seen lots of Rath Yatras, and I've never seen anybody standing by the side, enjoying the Rath Yatra and appreciating, manifest forearms and go back to Godhead. So one way of understanding is there's potency within that. And then there's subsequent choices. That person's, eating their hot dog and drinking their whatever they're doing and smoking their whatever, and et cetera, et cetera. They're making themselves dirty again, but their potency is there in that activity. And so we perform Rath Yatra because the mercy of Jagannath is very special. Then there's another explanation that I forget the Sanskrit term, but it's the meaning of the Sanskrit term is it's an exaggeration. And one explanation of such exaggerations is it's to inspire persons to the bhakti path. And then with that explanation that some things are exaggeration, there's no exaggeration with the holy name, because it's an offense against the holy name to consider that its glories are exaggeration. So other things may be, hyperbole or, an exaggeration. There's a Sanskrit phrase. I like the first of those two. There's potency within those things. It doesn't mean, one and done. It means do those things because this is now, a third explanation. This is in Bhakti Sandarbha by Jiva Goswami, where he says, when such statements are made, even with the holy name, by chanting the holy name one, such and such, still his explanation is, anarthas have their residual effect. And therefore it's not just one time, but many, many times, or a practice. Therefore the indication of practice is necessary. because of the presence of anarthas. And it takes some time for anarthas to be eradicated. So that's the anartha nivritti section in Bhakti Sandarbha when he's explaining. So it's not just one and done. Something else? Okay, let's go online.
Question from Mahati. I think it is Kirti Prabhu.
Yeah.
My senses are attached to sense objects and mind is attracted to temporary. Although I know that I need to follow path of bhakti, but my body and mind do not cooperate. Some days I do not find any taste in bhakti. The goal seems to be far out for me. How can I stay put?
Association and with faith continue the process. I mean, as you're reading what she said, my thought goes to the biblical statement. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. The biblical statement. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. So what do? You do sadhana in a good association with faith in the teachings and the teacher and the bhakti process, and you continue. You when you go to your kitchen and it's time to clean, it may take a while. And you may have some old pots. Maybe you don't, but some people do. In our ISKCON temples, we have many cases have old pots. And it takes a long time to make an old pot clean. It may take weeks to keep, etc., etc. Well, you just keep, because the cleaning process works, you continue cleaning till it's clean. That's faith. Narcha Nivritti. Keep going.
A question from Girivardhari Prabhu. For me, it is a little easier to apply Sambandha Jnana in devotees. I have struggled to apply in others and non-living objects. What are the practical ways I can cultivate it?
Do you understand the question? Don't just read it back. Explain.
No, no, Guru Maharaj. My understanding is he's able to see the presence of the Lord and within devotees, but not within other people. When in talking to materialistic people, not able to.
The spirit soul can be more covered, less covered. That's all. Where's the bhakti within the devotee? It's inherent within the soul, and by association with bhakti, that soul has become bhakti awakened. And there are others that haven't. So be an instrument of Krishna to help awaken bhakti. But, respect the soul. Respect goes to the soul. Doesn't, the behaviors and the speech and mannerisms and things. That's something else.
Question from Amara Mataji. Without looking at the bad, perhaps it is hard to value the good. Also, dukkha doshana darshanam is instructed in Bhagavad Gita. I came across a question that if we keep looking the bad nature of this world and happiness is temporary, then what is the impetus to carry on in the world who has not developed enough faith in Krishna? Could you kindly shed some light on this?
Yeah, you're right. I'm with you. So we need this. The light is we associate with those who have light, and the messages of those that have light, and then we can leave behind the darkness and go to the light. And it's not easy because we're prone to make mundane discriminations and pleasure and displeasure and all those things. We have tendencies like that. So it's hard to let go. So what do you do when it's hard to let go? Because you're a conditioned soul. You associate with those who are same question as Mahati Gopi was asking.
Yeah. Question from Snehavalli Mataji. So to confirm the understanding, following Devi Varnashrama with Bhakti will gradually take us to the stage of pure devotional service. Is this correct understanding?
There's a couple of conditions. One is become qualified. This is now speaking Narada's words to Yudhisthira, chapter 11, canto 7. Become a human being so that you can properly follow Varnashram. But so maybe that's a subset that's already included. Following Varnashram means you become a little civilized. That is, certain qualities are there that indicate here's a civilized being that's actually entered the human form of life, not just as the two-legged animal. So then they're civilized human being. They're following Varnashram and Daivi Varnashram. Then according to what, in response to your question, according to what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says to Ramananda Roy, that's good, but it's not sufficient. You can look, Snehavalli, you can look at that discussion with Ramananda Roy and hear what Lord Chaitanya says to the Daivi Varnashram example of Ramananda Roy. And Lord Chaitanya, he says it's external, and to go further. So that the further is what he accepts as 10:14:3. Jnane prayasa udapasya namanta eva, etc. So go through that, and I think you'll have an answer to your question. It's very helpful, and it's not complete. Is a short answer to your question.
From Uttama Bhakta Prabhu, from yesterday, for the sake of simplicity, is it fair to say that Mayavadis say this world is Maya and we say we are in Maya?
Well, they don't exactly say this world is Maya. They say it's false. And what Maya is our understanding of what Maya is and their understanding of what Maya is are different. We're an illusion, and they say it just doesn't exist. So a little qualifier, and then with that little qualifier, yes, but without the little qualifier, I wouldn't say yes. We're done. Yes, Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.